maybe while you're here, while we're waiting for others to join in.
Yes.
Hello.
Shall I go?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm in the UK. I'm in the countryside in Wiltshire. I'm really excited about this. I've been trying to make connections with the three principles on climate change and environmental issues for about 5 years. And so now that there's a whole group of people here who are looking at the same thing, it's very, very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I'd be curious about people from the non-three principles community. And some are dear, very dear to me that I see online, and others are new to me.
Okay, I'll say something. I'm not from the three principles. Oh, I'm Tyler, by the way. Hi. Hello, Amy. And I don't have familiarity with three principles. I am coming in because of Amy and what we've done here in Santa Cruz around climate activism. So I'm actually really looking forward to this and really curious about what I'll see here. So, oh, and then she can introduce herself.
I'm Nancy, also in Santa Cruz, where Amy lives, and I've had a bit of acquaintance over the years. I've been a fan from a distance of the three principles, and as Tyler said, I've been reconnected with Amy through the climate work, and I'm really thrilled to see them coming together. Thanks so much for doing this.
I'm Margot. Hi. And I'm in Malibu, California. And I've always been linking the 3 Ps and environmental stuff. So I feel like I'm at home here.
It's good to see you, Margot. It's been a while. Yeah. Time for another retreat, perhaps.
Perhaps so. It's there. Hey, Dave.
Hi, love.
Hi, good.
Anyone else? Anyone coming from another space like positive deep adaptation or extinction rebellion or someplace else that I don't know about? I see Jeff McMahon signed on. He's an old friend of mine from journalism days. So that's exciting to see him here. He also does a lot of yogic practice. So we're inviting people now to just say hello if they would like to. And I see Nancy. Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself? Can you unmute or are you muted? I can't tell on my end. Wait a second, unless I do this.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yes. Hi. I'm Nancy Lishkajan. I'm a fellow congregant at the Center for Spiritual Living Santa Cruz. I'm also on their board as president, and delighted to be here and learn more about the climate emergency that we all face.
All right, anyone else? Okay, Chantal, we've got everyone out of the waiting room.
We do for now. They keep popping up, but I'll take care of them. I'm just opening the door out of the waiting room.
Gentle. All right, so we're going to get started in 1 minute as we're just sort of letting people join on, and there'll be an opportunity to have dialogue with us. We have space built in at the end for that. So there'll be that opportunity, and we'll get a sec. I'm going to go get a glass of water because I'm going to be speaking first. So I will be right back.
Okay. Jen, I've just had a message from Vivian. Can you see a message from Vivian? She seems to be having some issue getting on. She's saying that she's using, but I've lost the message for some reason. I don't know if you can see it.
She's just gonna have a look and see if she can get hold of her.
Okay, I might just resend it to her.
Yeah, that'll probably.
I'll just invite her from here.
Alrighty. All right, so shall we get going then?
And I'll just,
I-
before we do that I'm, I have an appointment that I have to leave for at 10, so I will be leaving you at that point and try to keep you on my phone as I drive to Palo Alto.
I'm so glad you're here, Nancy.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. So we're going to get started. Yeah, we're good. We have the recording going. And what we'd like to do first is just introduce ourselves as the co-hosts of this event. My name, which you can see at the bottom of my little square, is Amy Chen Mills Naeem. And I am a teacher of the Three Principles, which is a spiritual psychology that's been around now for, oh God, almost 40 years, which originated with a man named Sidney Banks, who was actually a 9th grade educated welder who had this tremendous insight in the early 1970s. And his insight, as you're listening to us talk, is going to reflect back to you Buddhism and Taoism and mystical Christianity and just like, you know, all of the sort of core truths at the heart of our greatest spiritual and religious traditions. So it won't be unfamiliar. What might be different about the approach is the simplicity of it. Just really that. And that's what sometimes people who are used to complexity have a hard time with simplicity. So, so I've been teaching for a long time. I'm not going to get into all the background of that, except to say this work has been applied for me in communities and schools and for others here in business and other spaces. And this is the first time I know of, except for one other webinar that's happened so far, where the principles has been applied to the climate crisis. And so I'm excited about that. I'm a mother of two. I'm a former journalist, and that's how I know Jeff, who is on the line. And we were compadres together in our journalism days, and he's still a journalist at Forbes, and he writes about actually climate science, so that'll be helpful. And so I have this capacity as a former investigative journalist to just sort through loads of information and sort of analyze it and put it out, you know. And so I think there's a real need for that. There are journalists who are doing that. I have my own perspective on it, which all journalists I think really have, because we sort of can't escape that because we're human beings. But we need all those perspectives. So mine is sort of like, I'm a mother, I'm a former activist. I was very active when I was in college around the Central Intelligence Agency. I organized protests and got arrested and did debates and brought speakers in. So it feels like my former activism. I also wrote a book called CIA Off Campus, in which I went and looked at it because someone brought it up in our community that they found it online. And I looked at it, and there were several chapters on like how to be an activist and how to stay grounded. And I thought, wow, I like forgot I even wrote that back when I was just out of college. So it just feels like everything's kind of coming together. And I have to say, and now I'm also a local coordinator for Extinction Rebellion. That's how Tyler and I met. Tyler was our first arrest in Santa Cruz, and that was a very organic. That wasn't Extinction Rebellion saying someone needs to go get arrested. That was Tyler saying, oh my God, I have no idea what to do. I'm just going to go out to the middle of the street and start yelling and blocking traffic and trying to wake people up. That was the beginning of our chapter. So, so I'm very attuned now to the times. I'm also a member of Positive Deep Adaptation. I have to say I'm attuned to some sectors of people looking at climate, and that would be the Positive Deep Adaptation Group, founded by Jem Bendell, who's written a paper called Deep Adaptation, which is sort of like, look, we're facing collapse. In some areas of the world, collapse is already happening. And so how do we respond? How do we, you know, we have to not just talk about mitigation, but also how do we adapt to the changes that are occurring now for people. So having said all that, I don't think I've left. Oh, I'm also a member of the Center for Spiritual Living, and that's where Nancy's from. And so my real interest is in bringing, you know, the ideas of spirituality and the principles to activism work or even corporate change work, so that people are bring their best selves to the table. And that's why I'm here. And I'm like more excited about this than possibly anything else I've been doing. So I can feel all this energy running through my body. So I'm going to be quiet now and let the others introduce themselves. So either Dave or Jen or Chantal. Chantal with us still? There she is.
I'm here. I muted myself and I was yabbering away to myself. Sorry. Just seen a great message from Zaza to everyone. I'm sorry. I think I've joined a different group training that I was meant to. I apologize. This sounds so much more interesting. Then stay. Zaza, you don't go anywhere. Stay with us.
You're welcome.
Hi. Is it over to me?
Yes, it is.
Hi everyone. Hi. I'm Chantal Burns, and I'm a good friend of Amy's. I think we met probably about, I don't know, 10 years ago in Florida, I think, wasn't it, Amy? I think we met in Florida at a 3 Principles conference. I run the Conscious Leadership School, which is an organization that brings a 3 Principles inside out education, which I guess we'll be talking a bit more about later, that Amy's referred to, into organizations, both private and public sector. So we work a lot with leadership teams and other teams, and then we do a lot of work in public sector with government bodies, and we do a lot of work with social workers and similar, with the aim of the sole aim. Our absolute focus is bringing more sort of mental health, mental clarity, and mental well-being into the workplace, because we know that that's the foundation for everything. So that's what I do. I wrote a book called Instant Motivation, which really wasn't about motivation at all. It was about 3 principles and state of mind in the workplace, but the publisher really liked that title and they like a hook, so I agreed. So there's a little bit about motivation, but there's a deeper sort of message about our innate resilience, which I think is really relevant to what we're exploring here today. Like many who are going to be on these calls, I have an interest in nourishing this planet and nourishing ourselves and taking care of what is precious, whether that's ourselves, our families, our friends, our planet. Unlike Amy, I wouldn't consider myself to be an activist in this area. It's only in the last couple of, I think there are other people on this call that maybe, are far more active in that way. But in the last couple of years, I've felt really called to make changes in my own life, which I think is where it has to start, on our own doorstep. And I've just been called to make changes, just certain things that in terms of the way that we were living just didn't make sense to me anymore. So it's felt like a very natural, organic process of change. And that is everything from the way we consume to what we eat, to what I use to clean my house. I mean, just lots of different things. I'll start putting messages out on Facebook asking people, how do I get rid of this thing in my toilet without using a toxic, because everything seems toxic. So I'm like randomly sending out messages to people like, maybe people like Elaine, or, who's just such a guru around food and health and all, I go to people who I know a lot about stuff, and I just keep learning more. And I think the part of what drew me to this conversation is the importance of education and being informed. Because as I learn more and discover more, it makes it easier as things come more into my awareness. I start to see, oh, now I can see what I can do. Now I start to understand the difference that I can make. So I feel like this is just a very, very important conversation. I don't know what can be more important than looking after our planet. It just seems that it makes everything else pale into insignificance, because if we haven't got this, and everything else we're doing seems a little bit redundant. So yeah, I'm just happy to be here and be part of this conversation. And the work I do, like I said, is just broad, and we'll just have conversations with anyone who we feel can benefit from more mental well-being and clarity, and to get more in touch with our true nature, you know, who we really are on a spiritual and psychological level. So that's me. Over to the lovely Jen and Dave.
Thank you both, and hello everyone. My name's Jenny Anderson. I've been around the Three Principles community for the last 14 years, and at the same time I came across the principles, I came across a guy who introduced me to it called Dean Rees-Evans, who then took us to the training with Amy's late father, Dr. Roger Mills. But he also introduced me to the environment and the importance of it. And he was having this conversation with me 14 years ago. And I feel like I've been quite slow. Like I've made changes in my life, but I feel like over the last year, there seems to be kind of things coming into my awareness where I can actually see it and I can hear it. And I recognize it takes more than some of the small changes I've been making. So I have been trying to educate myself. And we recently watched a documentary called Tarwai with a guy called Bruce Parry. And the moment that kind of struck me in that was when he was in one of these tribes and he recognized it's all very well for us to blame big business and to blame corporation, but he said it's me and it's my neighbor and it's our consumption. And there was something in that. I think afterwards we went for dinner and just didn't speak to each other, and we recognized that it is about looking within ourselves. And I think it's moved us to be more active. And I feel really grateful for the I feel really grateful for my understanding in the principles, because I feel that has kept me grounded, and it's allowed me to kind of keep coming back to myself and seeing what can I do, and not kind of go off into panic, even though I'm aware that there are big changes that kind of need to come.
So yeah, hi, my name's Dave Ellery, and Jenny and I have a company called Freedom Thinking, and we're based in the UK. And I came to the principles, it was 6 years ago now. It was at a time of, I was suicidal, I was very depressed, and I was really struggling with life. And it's interesting that we're finally getting round to having these kind of conversations, because the environment and stress and worry about the environment and global warming, global dimming, that kind of thing were things that really created an awful lot of suffering in my life from a very, very, very young age. I studied ecology at college. I was looking to go into ecology, but I ended up becoming a tree surgeon. So for 17 years, I was a tree surgeon and a forester. And I no longer do that now. Thanks to starting to gain insight into the nature of consciousness, I realized fundamental things about life, all life. And it didn't make sense for me anymore to kill trees. So I'm just really thankful to Jen for kind of getting this. Amy dropped Jenny a message, and Jen said Dave's interested in this kind of thing, and I'm really thankful that we currently have 24 people online who are, well, more than 24. We've got 24 windows up. So it's nice to see. It's nice to see that we can start to open up the conversation of the three principles into a broader spectrum. So I think it's this is a beautiful thing. So thank you everybody for being part of this, and thank you everybody who's helped to create it.
All right, so I've been charged with sort of an overview of what this is all about. And we all come to the table here with slightly different backgrounds and views. And that's all welcome here. This is a place where we can sort of hash it out a little bit if we need to, but also understand that we each bring something to the table that is a kernel of truth. And so I would just ask everyone to really try to listen past maybe your preconceived notions, what you're used to thinking, and just open up a little bit and let something new in, and see if it works for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And if it, everyone has to test everything against their own wisdom, their own common sense. So the idea behind these webinars, and it's all on my website actually, or the website that we created, Light on the Horizon at amychen.com, is that the problem we're facing is not just a problem of the climate crisis, it's the problem of why we are in the crisis. And I see the root of the crisis as a mental health issue. And I also see now that there will be an effect of the crisis, which will be a mental health issue, and actually has already been a mental health issue for many, as Dave mentioned, and others I've talked to who are young people who are struggling right now, who are having a hard time sleeping, who are sort of envisioning a future that doesn't look good at all as news reports come out, which can be very alarming sometimes. So I think it's very relevant and timely to have this sort of merging of something that's been traditionally focused into the mental health field and the climate crisis. And so one of the things we are encouraging people to do is to take this day for their mental health and for Earth, because it happens that those two sort of pauses for ourselves are both good for our mental health and for the planet. Because one of the things that's happening, of course, is we have this sort of overconsumptive society. And so we're consuming more than the planet can really sustain. In fact, I've read that we're consuming 1.6 planets every year. So that can't last forever, right? And so where is the foundation or the root of that kind of consumerism? And we'll be talking about that. It comes from, and some of you have already discovered this for yourself or realized this for yourself, it comes from a sort of sense of, I am not complete without. You know, I am not complete, or I am not whole, or my image is not complete without the new car and the new house or the new clothes or the increasingly, let's say, finer stuff, right? And more money. So there's this addiction to things that are outside of us to make ourselves feel good. And for those of us who've been in the principles for a long time and other spiritual traditions, the message has been, and the message that we've been accepting and realizing and benefiting from, is that actually we are already whole. And so when people come from that stance of wholeness or contentment with life as it is, with gratitude for life as it is, then all of this outside stuff doesn't have the pull, right? So we'll talk more about that as we go along. So we're the day for themselves, and to, you know, if it makes sense to you, maybe not eat meat today if you're a meat eater, or do something that you know is going to reduce your carbon footprint, or not do something that you know would increase your carbon footprint, just as a way to exercise that muscle, you know, and to start thinking about how that could spread out into the rest of the week, if that makes sense. And that's not mandatory. We want people to join this webinar no matter what. So anyone can start with wherever they are. And that's something I actually like about Extinction Rebellion, is this idea of no shame, no blame. Like if we start shaming and blaming others, they won't want to get involved pretty much, because that's not what we gravitate to. So my task is to, for this first webinar, and we'll be doing these every Friday, and guys, if I've forgotten anything, please add it in when you speak, you know, anything that we talked about, is to go over the basic science. And what I'm going to show you now is a slideshow, and I'm going to try to share this and hope this works. I'm sharing my screen to PowerPoint. And I'm hoping I can get to slideshow as well, because I couldn't get there earlier. I'm trying to do slideshow, which will look much better, but I might not be able to because it's not like quite happening for me. So, all right. So you guys, can you see that?
Yeah, you should be able to click on.
Yeah, I'm trying to do slideshow, but it's not. Oh, here we go. From start. Here we go.
There we go.
Cool. Can you see? Okay, this is, can everyone hear and see? Thumbs up? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So this is interesting, because if you've been intrigued by Extinction Rebellion or pissed off by Extinction Rebellion, so here's something that they do. It's called the talk. All right, and so we did this here once in Santa Cruz, and we called it, Is It Time to Panic or How Fucked Are We? And we did that just really to kind of get people in the door. And we did this with Santa Cruz Climate Action Network. So I'm going to go over some of the first slides to just give people a picture of where we're at. And I think my whole thing is let's face facts. Like, let's just really face facts, and then whatever wisdom we have about what to do is going to be ours. That's going to be so unique to us. And I think everyone who's helping to host this call really understands the value of each person's wisdom given their own, life circumstances, extroversion, introversion, skills and talents, personalities, etc. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. This is, if you're not really familiar with the greenhouse effect, you see the sun there is shining onto Earth. And often, normally a lot of the heat gets reflected back out away from the Earth, back out into outer space. But what we're doing is we're sort of contributing to the atmospheric blanket here by adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, as well as methane and nitrous oxide and other chemicals and gases that basically start to create this blanket over Earth. And so the heat gets trapped inside the atmosphere, and that's what's called the greenhouse effect. Okay, so here you see our global temperatures. My bottom part is blocked because I'm seeing you all, but let me see. I think this is from pre-industrial, I can't see that part, to 2017, if I'm remembering correctly. And you see how the carbon dioxide has risen. We're now at like 417, 420 parts per million in the atmosphere. That's a weird, that's something kind of scientific, but you'll hear that quite a bit as you get familiar with the science. And you see how our temperature has risen along the lines of the carbon dioxide rise in the atmosphere. And some people say, okay, well, but that could happen, and we're going to heat up and then we're going to cool down, and that's what happens over time. That's an argument you'll hear quite often, but let me get to the next slide. So this is actually over time. I believe this is 800,000 years. Again, because of the Zoom, I can't see the bottom, but what I'm remembering is that it says like something like 800,000 years. And you see the concentrations of carbon dioxide over time. And so, the top of those blue sections is where it's been the highest. And that corresponds to like hothouse times in Earth when it's been very, very hot, including kind of like dinosaur type periods. And then you see the low points where it's been very, very cold, and we've even had mini ice ages in those times. At the far right, you'll see where we are today with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I put this red box around the right side of the slide because it looks like it's part of the graph, this line that goes up. That's actually where we are with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's at the very top of this graph. Does that make sense? It's not just a border of the graph. So we're looking at mini ice ages and hothouse periods, and then we're looking at where we're at now with carbon dioxide, which is, as you can see, off the charts. Okay, so climate change now is being called climate crisis by The Guardian, for example, because we are in a crisis. If you talk to people in the Micronesian islands, they are absolutely in a crisis. People from Central America who can't plant and do farming anymore because of droughts are in a crisis. The people in Chennai, India, 5 to 10 million, I've heard different numbers of population there, have run out of water. They are in a crisis. So for us to say it's change and we should think about what's going to happen in the future is not accurately understanding what's happening for people all around the world, and especially near the equatorial belt, where it's going to be the hottest and the hardest to deal with climate crisis. However, we've got all kinds of stuff going on all over the place. So in California, for example, we are seeing more severe droughts and wildfires. And that's a result of the erratic nature of weather that we're going to be seeing more and more of as the climate crisis intensifies. And that has to do with the way the jet stream is responding to the fluctuations of heat and so forth. I'm actually not totally sure, but I've seen the jet stream as it normally kind of is, sort of nice and wiggly up and down, and then Now it's kind of like, woo! And that's why we're getting the cold air coming in extremes, and then the hot air coming up from the equatorial region. So you see there's less snow and ice on the mountains. That's happening everywhere on all mountains. The ice and snow is melting. Warmer oceans. Another impact is the acidification of the oceans. And the warming and the acidification is damaging the coral reefs. So we've lost 30% of the coral reefs. Stronger storms and hurricanes, as you probably know. Hotter heat waves, and then effects to species as well. Here are just pictures of some of the impacts in different places. Hurricanes, the fire in Paradise, which is the hottest fire on record. In fact, the fire experts in our state are now saying we don't have an end to the fire season. It's continual. It used to be just in the summer, but the Paradise fire was like the hottest fire ever. And in fact, of the last 20 years, it's been like 17 to 18 of those years have been the hottest on record ever. More pictures. Do a few degrees matter? I'm not going to get into this. I feel like people know some of this, but when we talk about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, this is from the IPCC report. It's a summary of their report from November. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the UN. And you'll see that when we get to 1 degrees, you'll see the different effects on different parts of the ecosystem. And you see coral die-off is already happening between a rise of 0.5 to 1.0 Celsius. You see where coastal flooding is already happening at 1 degree. I have some academic friends here in Santa Cruz are saying we're actually already at 1.4. And then you see what starts to happen when we get to 2 degrees, where the coral die-off is intense, very high, extreme weather events very high, threatened ecosystems super high. I mean, and we're this is where we're at between 1 and 2 degrees right now. Okay. Okay, increase in temperatures. I'm going to skip that one. Ice and snow melting. Here's some pictures of 1924, 1985, and an ice flow that's melted already. And so most scientists are now saying the Arctic is becoming unstable. And that's a bad thing because, well, here's a picture of Greenland, and you see that the pink line is where the ice used to be. And then you see where the ice is now. This is as of April of 2019. The West Antarctic is losing ice 5 times faster in the 2000s than in the 1990s, and the loss is now exponential, doubling every decade. The Antarctica is our biggest store of ice and snow. This is happening, from my understanding, faster than models predicted and faster than people thought. I read an article about a National Geographic boat in Antarctica, and the scientists just being sort of in shock as they saw one of the largest glaciers or ice sheets, it's called the Thwaites, start to calve in front of their very eyes. They were like, oh my God, this is like one of the biggest ones. This is the ocean acidification issue. Ocean acidification, because the oceans have been absorbing a lot of carbon dioxide for us. This slide says 30%. I've seen more than 30%. I've seen like 90%. Let's just assume conservatively 30%. And what this does is affect sea life, right? Mussel shells, coral skeletons. I mean, what it's going to do to the fish, we don't know, but this is increasingly happening. And we've seen the coral die off, and we're experiencing specific things in our area that are very troubling, which are like the oysters are dying off, the mussels are baking. We just had a mussel bake-a-thon on the coast where the mussels were cooking in their shells. This is methane. I'm not going to get into this. I'm trying to. Okay, so then the other thing that's happening is at the same time is that 1 million species are at severe risk of extinction, and that's from the United Nations Biodiversity Report that came out this spring. That is a confirmation of the assertion by many scientists that we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction of species. And according to the World Wildlife Fund, we are losing species at the rate of roughly 200 per day. They say 200 to 250. I'm trying to be conservative. In parts of the world like Germany, the insect species are down by 70 to 80%. And that doesn't mean it's not happening in other areas of the world. What they're saying is that it's under study. We're not taking a look. And one of the things that sort of woke me up personally is that I wasn't seeing bugs on my windshield anymore like I used to. You know, so there are things that we can notice around us in our worlds that are, you know, like, whoa, what's going on? And one of the reasons I got involved is because of the sea stars here in Santa Cruz that we are now losing. And they've linked that to warmer oceans. And the scientists here are saying, yeah, it's due to climate change, but they're very conservative about saying anything because as scientists, they have to do all the studies to be able to prove that that's happening, and that takes time. Okay, so if we have not made the point, okay, are we handling this? Are we on top of this? What are we doing about this? Last year, we emitted more carbon dioxide as a planet than ever before. And the problem with what's happening in the Arctic regions is that as the ice and snow melts, there is more methane and CO2 stored beneath the ice and snow in the Arctic than we have already released into the atmosphere. And what happens is as ice and snow is melting, it's coming out. So we're triggering what are called these positive feedback loops. Positive is not a good word to describe them because for us they're negative in terms of our, you know, capacity to survive on the planet. So these are like tipping points. When you hear about tipping points, what that means is that it's already happening, you know, to some extent. And if it starts to really ramp up, we are not going to be able to control other emissions of CO2 that are not anthropogenic or caused by humans. And that's already starting to happen. At this time, everyone's working on, or a lot of people are working on, how do we actually try to get carbon out of the atmosphere because it hangs out for like up to 100 or more years. So we've got all this carbon in the atmosphere. How do we get it out? And right now, there's just no technology that we have to scale to start to do that. From my perspective, the IPCC report, because these scientists have to be very cautious about what they say because they've been attacked many times by the fossil fuel industry, which has been sowing doubt on all the science for the last 30 years and really has kind of really screwed this whole thing up. For me, it's considered conservative. And the main reason for me is because it does not include the projections of what these feedback loops may do because they're hard to project. You don't know how much carbon is going to come out, how much nitrous oxide is going to come out, or methane from the Arctic regions, and what's going to happen with all of that. All right, so, okay, this is where I love this. We have an artist in Santa Cruz who does these drawings of, you know, what's going to be like in who knows, decades or a century, who knows really, right? And here's the sea level rise. I love what he does because he has this little garden and bicycles. I'm like, well, I hope it's that nice, like that we've all just retreated and we're having lovely farmers markets and so forth. But I think the real threat is the threat to the food chain. You know, we're already seeing kelp loss here in the Monterey Bay because of this. The warmer ocean waters appear to have affected the severity of what's called the sea star wasting syndrome, which I saw happen before my very eyes 5 years ago when the sea stars started to dissolve where I used to go and visit with them. They're having a hard time coming back because of the warmer ocean waters. And we have like the sunflower sea star, which is deeper, which people don't get to go and touch and feel. It's deeper in the bay. They can't find them, they're completely gone. So this is leading to an urchin outbreak. This is an email from a scientist here in Santa Cruz talking about the science and him looking for the sea stars and what's happened. And he says, yes, the warmer El Niños are a manifestation of climate change on the North Coast. This led to the widespread loss of kelp forests. The giant sun star also declined dramatically. We simply can't find them now. So it just doesn't take much to connect the dots and start to think, oh my God, like the kelp forests are such a big part of our ecosystem, you know, in terms of everything, the fisheries, the otters. So we've lost in Pacific Grove healthy kelp forests already, and they're turning into urchin barrens. This is the sunflower sea star that we can't find right now. Gray whales are starting to wash up on our shores. We're having a record die-off. We're not sure whether because there are actually quite a lot of them now. They've really recovered very well. So it might be that there are just too many. And so they're eating up the food supplies, and they're just too many. So they're sort of naturally having a die-off. But we do know that the ones that are washing up on shore represent only a fraction of the ones that are dying, because they don't all wash up on shore. And there is a connection between the gray whale food supply and the warming oceans. Like, it affects their food supply up near Alaska, from what I understand. And they're considered a canary species for the rest of the whales in terms of global heating, I'm going to say. So this one, I'm not going to get into. I talked about a lot of that. Oh, this is the albedo effect. This is where the ice and snow, as they melt, the other thing that happens, did I say this already? Like, they normally reflect sunlight back out into space, which is a good thing. It's like a little reflective, like an umbrella that you could wear to reflect the sun away from your head. And what happens as we lose albedo is that more heat goes into the ocean is darker. So the planet is now heating up because of that as well. Both the oceans and the land masses that are uncovered when the white ice and snow melts back. And the reflection of the ice and snow is called the albedo effect. And that's worrying, because that creates another feedback loop of warming. This is Santa Cruz. You can find these maps everywhere. Jeff actually is really good at finding these maps. And you can see this is the entire downtown, actually, underwater. It's just a question of when. And you could probably find that for your city as well. We now have mass migration. We understand the crisis, most of us, at the US border. It's a humanitarian crisis. Very wealthy people, hedge fund managers, have been on record now saying, like, they're building these bunkers and so forth. They're worried about two things. One, kind of like a revolution of like the 99% as income inequality increases. And they're also worried about the climate crisis and trying to figure out what to do. I would hope that they would take their money and put it into solving the crisis. Like, I would welcome that. That would be good. But some of them are actually planning to try to ride it out in this kind of a thing, like a bunker, and having like stored food in their own farms. And they're wondering how to motivate their armed guards, because there will be no monetary system. And this is from a Medium piece by Douglas Rushkoff called Survival of the Richest. He was called in to consult with a bunch of hedge fund managers and talk to them. And they ended up wanting to talk about, how do we survive the crisis to come? Where should we move to? Where should we buy our farms? That kind of thing. Climate change is now reaching the end game. I think this much is true. We could argue about how conservative the IPCC report is. We can argue about the science. We can argue about how quickly things will happen. The truth is, it's hard to know, because really, you know, people say Earth bats last, and that's what's going to happen, is Earth is going to decide what the timeline is. We can make projections, but it seems to me that we should be focused on a risk reduction strategy, which is, let's assume that the worst could happen and prepare for that. Okay, moment of sense. We're going to skip, because we're going to be talking about psychological impacts. These are different things you can do. I'm not going to get into all this. We can do this at another time. This is the Extinction Rebellion slide about civil disobedience, and that's their response, because they feel that the government has not responded properly or to scale. And this is XR in London. So, you know what, let's stop here. I want to get a sense of where everyone's at too, because I've been talking for a long time. Any questions? And some of you have maybe are already familiar with all of this. Any questions so far? And so you'd have to unmute yourself. It's not fun. One of the metaphors I've been using lately is that it's kind of like climate change for a lot of people is kind of like your spouse is having an affair, and they're kind of keeping it a secret from you. So it's like you don't really, you kind of know it in your heart, but it's not really totally obvious to you. You haven't really looked at it. And yet you sense that if you look at it, you know, your whole life will change. And you'll be forced to make changes, and you'll go into this unknown space where you don't know quite what to do or who you are anymore or what your life should be about. And at the very least, it would be about changing the inside of you, and maybe if you can work it out with your husband, the inside of him, right? But things are going to change. And so a lot of people stay in marriages when they know their spouses are out there misbehaving or whatever they're doing, because they're just not ready to face it. And that's what I find a lot of the time. And so my whole thing is like, let's face facts. If we're not facing facts, we can't respond properly. So let's face facts. And then from that facing of facts and from our wisdom, let's respond. And that will be different for every person. So I think that's all I need to say. Are there any questions at all? Yeah, Nancy.
Hi, Amy. I really appreciate your outline and explanation today. And I think the piece, well, for me, it's just totally very sad and very depressing and very concerning. And I could just keep listing in negative adjectives. But the piece you jumped over at the end is the piece that I am most, interested in, and that is the what can we do segment of the presentation. And I know there's from individually, what can I do, and how do I use my consciousness to affect things in a positive way. And then there's the, action steps individually or with the community of our country, our world. So that's the piece that I think is when I have a chance next, since I have to leave in just a few minutes, that I would like to focus on as well.
Yeah, that will be we're going to cover that every Friday. So our idea is to have these every Friday. And we are not going to cover the science every time. We're going to assume that people, and half the people on this call probably already know the science pretty well. But we will have that on the YouTube, and we'll also be putting it on our Extinction Rebellion page in Santa Cruz, this particular slideshow, so that people can get acquainted. And then the rest of this will be about supporting people with where they're at, because I have some of the Extinction Rebellion people who are wonderful, beautiful, spiritually grounded people are, I talked to one woman who spent the last weekend just crying down on Westcliff, and that's, that's fine. Like, that's welcome. And there's another space to be in as well. So I think we have to allow for the grieving and the sometimes anxiety and the fear, but then there's something deeper. There's a deeper place we can go to. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. So if you can join in on the call, that would be great. Okay, I can't hear you, but I think I know what you're saying. All right, anyone else? Any thoughts about the science before we move on? And I know it's taken some time, and I'm sorry about that, but hopefully we'll have more time on future calls. Yeah, Nancy.
Just a thought I said the other night. I'm so grateful for the scientists coming out of the closet to tell the truth and take the consequences within their scientific community. And that's why we have the high quality, hard hitting slides you were just talking about. But I also want to be, I'm alert to the notion they're what they are confident about when they speak is what is happening physically and biologically in the world. But most of them are not social scientists. They're not, their expertise is not in social transformation. There are others who are, and there's a huge body of knowledge and experience and what I call stories of citizen successes from around the world that we also need to be drawing upon, that addresses the issues that the other Nancy was just asking, and that will be as your focus over time, Amy, and that in fact the three principles themselves are a wonderful example of that. And that is also a science. It's also a body of knowledge that we need to be dipping into and then articulating as, if you will, the complementary part of what we're putting out there in the world.
Yeah. And that's a great lead into Chantal and David Jen.
Hi. Thanks, Amy, for that. I mean, it's obviously very interesting, and it can present a bit of a doom and gloom kind of story. But I know that between us, I know that what we're interested in is the light on the horizon, right? a more hopeful story. When I see those statistics and those facts, I'm not heavily involved in Extension Rebellion or, you know, a lot of the groups you've been involved in. For me, it just gives me a bit of a kick up the bum, you know. I don't feel scared. I feel like, okay, what do we need to do? Or what can I do? So we wanted to speak a little bit about these principles. And I think there's probably lots of people, I don't know how many people who are on this webinar right now are in, I know certain people like Vivian and Elaine, but I don't know how many, but it's really, this is for also those who may join in the future or listen to this recording who maybe aren't so familiar. But the thing that really struck me was when Amy was talking about, when you talked about facing facts, when I, 10 or 11 years ago, when I got involved in this three principles, you could call it a psychology, understanding, paradigm, it doesn't really matter what we call it. But when I got involved, for me, I felt like I was meeting some real facts about the human experience. Whereas before, pre the principles, I was engaging with a lot of ideas, let's say, really interesting ideas, but ideas about our psychology or our spiritual life. And when I was introduced to the principles as an understanding, as a sort of a body of knowledge, a deeper knowledge about the human experience, it just really, it just felt undeniable to me. So maybe we need to face the facts about the human experience in a way that's really helpful. So the facts as I see it, okay, maybe Jen and Dave will also speak to this in their own way. But it seems to me like there are fundamental facts about the human experience, that we are conscious beings, that there is something that we call consciousness. And we've been talking, some of you have already talked about consciousness, and if you're in a more spiritual orientation, then you'll probably, that's very familiar to you, language and in terms of an orientation. So there's something called consciousness that allows us to experience the existence of everything, the existence of our own experience of thought and feeling, the existence of reality. So there's something called consciousness. And then there is the fact that we are thinkers, that we think. I mean, that, I like to argue, but I can't argue with that one. I used to be able to argue everything, just like, but this seems like something that I really can't argue. It seems undeniable that there is something called thought, that there is this power to think. But for me, where it's most interesting is to look towards a fundamental fact or power or law of nature, again, whatever you want to describe it as, that there is some divine universal energy that is part of us, that is behind nature, that is behind everything. Because I see every moment in my life that I look around in nature and I look to the human body and I see that there are all these things happening that I have nothing to do with. I don't make my heart beat, it beats. I don't force oxygen to move around my body, it does. I don't make myself bleed. If I cut myself, I bleed, you know, and I don't make myself heal. There is healing. You know, there are all these things that seem to be happening as human beings and in nature. You know, when I look in my garden and we don't use anything to get rid of weeds apart from just pulling things out. And of course, a weed is whatever you decide is a weed. But I see things growing in places that they just shouldn't grow. You know, it's so funny when you do a Google search for resilience, you always get these pictures, don't you, of trees coming up through concrete and as if to exemplify what resilience is. But that does happen. You know, I've been to places where there's a tree just sprouting out and you just think, how is life possible there? In that place, how is life possible? So there's something for me that I find so fascinating and so incredibly hopeful, that there is some deeper intelligence, some deeper order, some deeper capability behind life that is not personal, that I have nothing to do with, that we have nothing to do with, and yet we're part of it. So we do have something to do with it, but we don't control it. And that doesn't fill me with any sense of fear. It makes me feel very hopeful, because if it were just down to me, I don't think it would be as hopeful. You know, if life was just down to me, if fixing stuff was just down to me, then, you know, we should just give up now. But it's not, thank goodness. There is something greater than me. There's something before me, beyond me, right? All of us. Yeah. So it's mysterious. Like, I'm not a scientist, and yet I don't think I need to be a scientist to know that there is consciousness, to know that there is the capacity to think, that there is the power to think, and to know that there is some deeper intelligence and energy behind life. But if you ask any physicist or scientist, they'll agree with that. And I ask that question often to people in that world, and they have no issue with that. That seems undeniable to them too. So what does that all mean? Well, for me, I was thinking about, you know, this idea of ecosystems, and in a way, the planet, and again, Amy might not agree with this, I don't know, but I want to share this, and because this is about sort of just being open and having dialogue, and I'm not coming in as an expert in anything, I'm just sharing what makes sense to me right now. But the planet has its own ecosystems, and there is a way that the planet returns to, you know, there's homeostasis, there's a way that the planet returns to some sense of balance. And it's amazing to me that we can make a lot of mess with the planet, and still it fights back. You know, that tree grows where it shouldn't. Things keep living and breathing, and life keeps getting created, even though we're doing what we're doing, even though we're making the mess that we're making. But I don't believe that's sustainable. And I was thinking, well, what's that got to do with the mind? And to me, the mind has its own beautiful ecosystem as well. But we can mess with that ecosystem. And for me, understanding about these principles, and I want Jen and Dave to speak to this too, like I said, in their way, but understanding that there are fundamental laws of nature that are behind the human experience, that create their own sort of magnificent ecosystem, you know, that we feel and we live in the experience of our thinking moment to moment, that's a divine system that we're born into, that moment to moment we are seeing and feeling and experiencing our thoughts and our and what is coming through the mind, moment to moment, consciousness, moment to moment, is coming to life in us and giving us a felt experience of reality. And that is a magnificent, incredible thing. But we can misuse that. We can mess with the ecosystem, and we do innocently. And so, in my view, and I can only speak for myself right now, I would rather, in relation to this climate crisis or climate change, or however you want to think about it, I know I want to take action from a place of love and clarity and perspective. I don't want to be taking action from a place of fear and insecurity and mindless action. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think our capacity as human beings to live from love and wisdom and perspective is greatly enhanced, in my view, when we understand a bit more about this ecosystem, when we understand a bit more about how our minds work. I think it puts us in a better place to have the perspective. And I see that there's, I don't know whether it's correlation or causation, but in the years leading up to this point now, where I have been learning more about these spiritual, psycho-spiritual principles, I feel a deeper connection with the earth and with the planet and with every, you know, I can't squash anything now. I used to be able to squash an insect without thinking about it. I just can't do it now. No one told me you shouldn't squash insects. They're living things. I mean, we know that, but I can't do it. I see that, you know, I experience the world very differently now. Lots of people have been living that way all their lives. So this isn't that this is something new. All we're doing is shining a light on what is it that allows us to connect more deeply with that sense of innate resilience and love and connection that is what we are already made of, that is who we are. So I feel like my part in this conversation, or my interest in this wider conversation, is how can we encourage and foster and nourish more of that sense of connection and love and clarity and perspective, so that then each of us in our own lives will discover what makes sense for us in what we can do, how we can make a difference. Not because someone's telling us what we should do, but because it just comes through us as, this makes sense. This is the only way I can live now. This is what makes sense to me. Because I know that if someone tells me to stop doing certain things, I'm not great at being told what to do. but the fact that I have wisdom that comes through me that helps guide me to make better decisions, that I love. And so I'm not in the business in our programs with Conscious Leadership School. We are all about just helping people find their own wisdom and find their clarity. And I see time after time after time that when people get in touch with that for themselves, that deeper sense of peace, that deeper sense of clarity, then they start to have brilliant ideas to solve problems, and they get active and they get engaged in their life in a way that they weren't before. So it's not, we have to solve this planetary crisis so then we can feel peaceful and relax. I think that the people who are getting close to burnout that Amy's talked to me about, who are real activists, I love them for what they're doing. I love the intention of what they're doing, but I want to put my arms around them and say, it's okay, you know, you can rest, you can stop sometimes, you can, and they need to, we need to be healthy in ourselves. We need to have peace of mind in ourselves if we're going to be any use to this planet whatsoever. That's how it looks to me. So part of our inquiry, I suppose, together is to explore the truth of these principles and what they mean and the implications that they can have as we look to this climate crisis and say, okay, what can we do? And I think it starts with taking care of our own mental health and helping others to do the same. So that's all I wanted to share for now. I don't know if anyone wants to share anything or ask anything, or if there are any questions, or do we want to just invite Dave and Jen to share. Amy, do you have any thoughts? Do you want to open it up to the group?
I'd love to have Dave and Jen share a little, because they were going to do the connection piece a little bit. And then, and I want to also, in that way, hopefully we'll have time too, if we can sort of let them do their piece. I'd love to hear from them. And then we will, I mean, if people can stay on, we can probably stay on. I'm not sure if our group can all stay on, but we'll see. We'll just have to see. We'll go with the flow. And if people need to sign off at 10:30, then that's fine.
Okay, so Jen and Dave.
Hello. Thanks, Chantal. And thanks, Amy. Thanks for that, love. So I'm just going to start by, can everybody hear us okay? Right, and I apologize for anybody who can't understand my accent. I never actually realized I had an accent till I left Cumbria. So you're just going to have to bear with me. It's the only one I can do others, but they come across a bit racist. So I'm just going to start by reading our vision statement for freedom thinking. It was something that Jen and I, it was a couple of years ago now, we sat down and we were like, what do we want freedom thinking to be about? And we came up with a vision statement, and we see a world united in understanding and common humanity, where every individual realizes their own connection, innate resilience, creativity, and potential to create a life in which they thrive and flourish. We see a world where all people are understood, appreciated, valued, and included in the creation of a viable existence for every living being, and the well-being of the whole takes a sustainable precedence. And I feel like that is kind of where this conversation is coming from, and this webinar series is coming from. And like I said at the beginning, for me personally, it was very much, this topic of conversation was something that really dragged me down. Listening to the statistics, the imagination that was created, the imaginary scenarios of the future that were created within my mind drove me to absolute distraction, to the point of I couldn't speak to anybody about it. I suffered so severely. The climate, the world, the planet, the state of the planet was something that over the past, I would have said 33 years, I'm 39 years now. Over the past 33 years, it was very much at the forefront of my mind. And I'm very thankful to the conversation around the three principles, because not only did it change my life, but it also gave me a wake up to see, well, there is a really common sense way that is foundational to everything that we're talking about. There's a foundational way of helping to create change. This is why we're all on this call. We want to see a world where the sustainability of the whole takes precedence. And I think the first question has to be, how have we got to this stage? Because without understanding firstly how, we cannot understand how to get out of it. And to me, it's so simple. I'm not talking about the complexities of the environment, but I'm talking about the reason for why the world is, as it stands in this very present moment. And that is regardless of what our opinion of the world is. But the world stands as it does, given the thinking that humanity has had up until this point. Given what has been a reality for every single living being, the world is exactly as it is. You could say it's its fate. Given what has been thought, felt, and acted upon. The fate of the planet is exactly as it sits right in this very present moment. It couldn't be anything else. It simply couldn't be anything else. given the previous thinking and action that humanity as a whole has done. And I think the beautiful thing about fate is, from this very moment onwards into the future, we simply go into an infinite potential. And so coming across the principles and having my own personal wake up was to show me that the way that I had lived up until that moment, that wasn't a fixed thing, that I can change. And I changed through starting to gain clarity into the nature of life. This is a fundamental thing. Chantal spoke about the principles: consciousness, thought, mind. They're all words to describe a force that we all are, that every single living thing is. And to me, it's really obvious now. I look at life from a perspective of starting to gain understanding into the spiritual or the formless nature of life, that there is the greatest problem that the planet faces is that it has a species upon it which has forgotten that it's nature. It has a species upon it that walks around on the planet. It calls nature the natural world, as though, and the human world, as though there is somehow some kind of separation or division, that humanity is not nature. Nature being the form that the universe has taken. Human beings didn't create human beings. We're not one of the human's great inventions. No, humanity is a consequence of the same thing that created the trees, the fish, the starfish. Everything is fundamentally one, and humanity has forgotten that. It sees itself as at the top of a pyramid. Human beings are at the top of a pyramid, and everything else below it is lesser than. But there is no pyramid. And this ego that humanity is walking around in is the fundamental, as far as I can see, the fundamental problem that the planet faces. It is lost in its own thoughts. It is lost in its own belief as to what it thinks it is, who it thinks it is, and what it needs in order to be okay. I was a tree surgeon for 17 years. And I hold my hands up when I say I took down some magnificent trees for money. It's something that now I don't beat myself up over, but I'm reflective on. And I think there was a massive turning point in my life when I woke up one day and I realized one of the fundamental things that helped change my life was the realization that there is no experience of reality outside of my mind. I simply live in my own world of consciousness. I see what I believe. And everybody is doing this. Everybody is living in a separate reality. But we've got confused and we believe that there is a reality external to us that is inflicting itself upon us, therefore creating all our emotions and feelings. We don't realize that our emotions or feelings are a reflection of the consciousness state that we are in any given moment, that there is no reality that we can possibly conceive outside of thought. When I woke up to that, I saw that my reality was an illusion, but it was my life. There's 7.6 billion human beings walking around in separate realities, each thinking that their reality is a truth, a reality that is real. And I started to gain respect and understanding for people. And I started to see how I can get lost in my reality and other people can get lost in their realities too. When I'm lost in my reality, I act like a dickhead. And when other people are lost in their realities, they act like dickheads, and I can see myself in that. Because ultimately, everybody is a reflection of consciousness in any given moment. But one day I woke up and I realized that I had this very simple sentence running through my head. And I've totally forgotten it. Yeah, that's it. Consciousness equals awareness. Consciousness is awareness. To be aware is an experience. An experience is reality. Consciousness equals awareness, equals experience, equals a reality. And then I had a look at the trees that I was cutting, and I realized that they reacted once I'd cut them. When I felled 2 trees out that were stood side by side, this tree here didn't entangle itself into the next tree. They grew side by side with awareness of one another. When I felled this tree out, when they stood together, they created the impression of a whole canopy. When I felled this side of the tree out, one tree out, it was left bare, and then just canopy on this side, but bare. And over a period of time, it started to grow back. It was aware that its neighbor had gone. And it started to put leaf out on the other side to utilize that new light that had been offered to it.
So Dave, I want to jump in here for a second because we have 10 minutes left in terms of the time frame that we have. And I want to make sure people have questions. And Jen, I didn't know if you wanted to say something. Is that okay if we just take a little pause?
In 2 minutes, I'll just round this up.
Okay.
And then go to questions.
Okay.
Yeah, because I want people to be able to link it to if their activism or whatever they're doing.
So to see consciousness in a tree is to start to see consciousness literally in every single living being. And every living being its own experience of life. It has feelings, it has emotions, it has thoughts. Now people say trees don't think, but I obviously don't have time now to just talk about that. But I do wonder to myself, what would humanity's relationship be to the entire whole if one day it woke up and realized that every living thing is a separate reality? That every living thing is its own experience, has its own experience of life. In the same way that my reality is the entirety of everything I know, to an ant in a colony, a single ant, its whole world exists within itself. I feel like if humanity could start to wake up and realize that it is part of a whole, it's not separate from nature, it is entirely nature. But at the moment, it's acting like motor neurons disease. I feel like this is where the principle starts to come in with the climate conversation. Because as we start to recognize that we are living in the experience of consciousness and thought, I'm going to have to save this conversation for another time. I'll have to save this. We'll go to questions.
I just want to make sure people get a chance to connect, because I know for me that's where my learning edge has been. And I'm noticing that depending on my state of mind, either everything looks awful and terrible and my work is for nothing and it's all, what's the point? Or it's like I'm engaged and grateful for all the new relationships and the effectiveness that I feel I'm having. And I'm alive and energetic, and whether or not the planet actually survives for us isn't as important to me, actually. But I'm conscious, Jen, how are you doing? And we have to balance. Is it okay to go to questions for a bit, or how are you feeling? Yeah? So let's open it to questions. Is there confusion, or, oh my gosh, how is this, does this even relate to anything that I'm doing? Or does it make sense? Yeah, Tyler.
Yeah, if you could just quickly clarify who the questions are meant to be addressed to. Is it meant to be addressed to the whole group of us here, or the specific people that we're talking, or maybe some third option I'm not aware of?
Anyone.
Anyone, yeah.
Anyone? Okay. Just wanted to figure that out.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, I see mine. Hang on. Hello. So, yeah, it makes total sense. And I just find myself being pulled very strongly in like sheer panic to then very uplifted by what Chantal's saying. And then like really understanding what Dave's saying as well. So my question is really, how do I deal with the many ideas that come up and not feel paralyzed when it comes to choosing one? Is my conscious mind like pointless? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, because obviously, like I just did this renewable energy thing, and it just doesn't feel enough. And then I get all these like amazing ideas, like, oh, well, what if we all just borrowed as much money as we could from the banks, and then just like paid it to Greenpeace or the, you know, and then it's like, okay, well that's ridiculous. Let's not say that. You know, like it's like I just don't know. Like, it's a great idea, right? But then are we actually going to do that? And this is where it's like, well, I don't want to spend energy on ideas that aren't really going to happen. Like Stuart, for instance, my partner is a landscaper. He's not going to get an electric truck anytime soon. So it's like, what we're going to do, like not go to work. So there's like, I've done plant medicine. I've seen what Dave is saying very clearly, but I've also gone back to old behaviours, and so I just feel like I want to do as much as I can. And I suppose there's no real question here. I'm just sharing what I think.
Can I speak to that a little bit? Because I was talking to a friend last night, and it was really a good conversation. It was like, oh, I've got to talk to Russell. So I called Russell and I said, you know, I think my issue is I have this sense of efficacy. And like, it's kind of true. If you have an idea and you put energy into it, something will happen, right? If you put a lot of energy in. So I have this idea of like, I could be doing this and doing that and doing that. Not just one idea, several. And I can see where those things would make a difference. And yet, so how do you decide what to be doing, right? And it's confusing and complicated and all of that. But it's actually, this is why I've been encouraging this idea of a day of rest or a time of rest. Because when we clear our minds completely, you know, just like everything out, and I'm walking in the woods and that's all I'm doing. I mean, the thoughts are still there, but I'm not getting on the train and following them down the track. They're just coming and going, right? Then this quietness of mind starts to prioritize. There's like a natural prioritization that happens, and you start to notice like what is happening in your world a little from a bigger picture perspective. And oh, this is actually working out. I see where there's energy, and this feels really good. And this, oh, I've got to back away from that. Or so that's where I can see the principles, and also, you know, what I'm learning at Center for Spiritual Living, it's actually very, very similar, have such a role to play in helping us move, because I see a lot of people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and I can do that. But when we get grounded, it's like, okay, I just want to do this. And you feel it. It's a feeling. It's the difference of feeling. From the feeling of like, to the feeling of like, yes. And then here's the reason I think I'm on this call, is because my thing is like, there are no rules about what we do. If you want to go chain yourself to a truck on a bridge, and that feels like the yes to you, do it. If you want to, like, you know, I mean, because we're in a space of huge transformation. So we're all going to need to so this is sort of my idea of these webinars, is we're all going to need to really get clear about our wisdom and trust that if we follow that, then we're doing our best. And that's enough. Tyler.
Okay, thanks. This time I have sort of a substantive question, but I think it'll lead into where you want to take this webinar series, which I hope, I think it will, which is, so I'm not really familiar with three principles or anything like that. It sounds really interesting and exciting. I know my background is focused so far on how we approach problems, not just on our own, in our own terms, but interconnectedly, and I would say interdependently. Basically, how we organize ourselves and the the capacity for the human beings to solve their problems together. And I guess I wanted to think that if I just wanted to think, where would maybe the different options for approaching these issues lie? Because one thing I notice about myself is that if my mental health is triggered, I have to often, if I look for the cause, and especially in the climate crisis, the cause can often be, or at least a substantial amount of it can be given to me, that basically when I'm not seeing other people act in ways that I find effective, or I'm not sure how their actions fit within the big picture, I'm not sure how the society around me is forming to help me figure out what I need to do, who I am, how we're all working together, it brings me a lot of anxiety and stress. So, I mean, the better we do, sort of, the more other people have a reason to let go of some of the burdens. They don't have to take it all upon themselves to fix, change, save the world. And it may be a lot easier to give other people that gift by doing the things that seem to be actually working or having effects. So I don't know where that fits in three principles. I'd like to hear that, but otherwise that's where I'm kind of coming from here. So
if people need to go, feel free to go, and join us next Friday. We're going to do these every Friday for the next 6 weeks, and if it goes well, we're going to just keep going, because there's such a need, I think, for this kind of platform and support. So feel free to sign off if you need to. I'm going to stay for a little bit, and this will all go up on a YouTube channel we're hoping will be called Light on the Horizon. And so Jen, Chantal, do you want to respond to Tyler at all? Or actually, I'm going to ask Jen first, since she hasn't spoken really yet. If there's anything that occurs to you.
I feel like when I came across the principles, it reintroduced me to myself. It reintroduced me to the fact I had wisdom. I had this teacher within. And when I felt connected to myself, I felt connected to everything around me and others, and I wanted to serve and I wanted to help. And I feel like when you help people wake up to their true nature, or their true self, however you want to describe it, it's almost like you can't, everyone I meet within the community wants to serve in some way. And I feel like there is so much potential within consciousness that we're not seeing, because we get so lost and fixated on ourselves. And like, I've got 2 young nieces at the moment, and I watch like the world of self-obsession being created, and the selfies, and the culture is all about lack and need, and creating so much suffering. And I feel like the principles conversation brings us back to ourselves, and from that place we are more grounded and centered, and our decisions change. And I feel like we then want to, like, the community of the principles, I feel like it's just expanded and growing. And every time I meet people at conferences yearly, they start to change and they seem to evolve. And I feel like that's what we need. We need new thought. We need people to evolve and to feel connected. And then we do different. And I feel like that's where the principles comes in, is that it settles us. And I used to live out of such fear and anxiety and judgment, whereas now, like Dave was saying, you get to see people do what makes sense to them. And if they don't think to question their own minds, then they'll keep doing that. But when you connect them with themselves again, I feel like they make different choices. I don't know, Chantal, if you'd want to add to that, but I feel like that's where the community comes in. We want to support each other. We love ourselves, we love other people, we recognize connection. And like you stop, then someone described it to us once, it's almost like we're drilling our own knee. Like it doesn't make sense to do that when you recognize we're connected, when you recognize that there's this energy behind life that we're all part of. And I think people, when they feel separated and scared, they do stupid things. When they feel connected and in love, they do wise things. And I feel like that's what the principles bring. So I do feel so moved at the moment to more action. I'm like, I get that I've been doing some things, but it's almost like, what else can I do? And I'm getting educated. And I feel like before, maybe I had my head in the sand a bit, like, oh, it can't be that bad. But it feels like I'm not doing it from a place of panic. And I don't begin to say that I've had an experience of oneness. I've got a sense of it, but I want to bring that to consciousness. I want to bring love and compassion and understanding to consciousness rather than more fear and more anger. But it doesn't mean I'm then not going to act. So I feel like that's what it brings.
Yeah, I love what you said, Tyler. You know, because I feel that as well. Like, you know, I love the fact that I know that there are people I can connect with, and that there can be a sense of community around this. And that's you know, when people start to come together in communities and start to help each other and support each other, it's just the best feeling, isn't it? It's just that sense of connection, and we're all in this together. So I really hear you, and I don't know that I want to say much to that. I think that the conversations that are coming over the next few weeks, I feel that they will in different ways really speak to what you just said. So it's not just a one conversation deal here, you know. But I did just post something which I think maybe is relevant, which I just posted today on Facebook on my own page. And it's Einstein. And he said, so I think it's so beautiful. He said, a human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, or she experiences herself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires, which I think is very relevant to what we've been talking about, and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, maybe, but the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. And I feel like when I feel a sense of my own resilience and inner security, it doesn't matter how bleak things might look. I know I can do something. I know there's possibility. And I think that's, you know, the title, the name of this, whatever this is, this conversation, this community, Light on the Horizon, really for me sums that up. You know, we find our inner security, get in touch with our own resilience. We understand how reality is being created for us moment to moment. And we start to live from more perspective, more clarity, more wisdom. And like we've all said in different ways, we start to naturally make better choices and decisions for ourselves. And we can help each other with that too. You know, we get to be in community, sharing ideas, so that Lucy can say to us, well, I've been thinking about this and I'm thinking about that, and someone can have a conversation with her and maybe help her get clear, you know, and we can be a space for each other. And that's what I think is really lovely about this. So that's...
I wanted to say something. Tyler, you were talking about looking at what everyone's doing, and there's just discernment, like, okay, this is what everyone's doing or what everyone's not doing, and that's fine to see all that. But I think one of the messages of the principles that I always have to relearn is like, and I get to mind my own business. And that doesn't mean I don't have conversations with people, but minding my business is like the most important thing. So It means what is it for me to do? And that might be having conversations with people about what can we do. But it goes back to like what really makes sense for me, what really pulls on my heartstrings, as people say, or my, men like to say their gut. What's my gut feeling about what to do? And the difference for most people is it's coming out of the head and into the feeling of a decision, the feeling of an action. And that's nice, because when we go with the feeling, we can just sort of let all this go. Because this can go on and on and on. Like, oh, is it okay? Is it not okay? Should I be involved? Should I not be involved? And what I'm noticing is when my state of mind clears, when I come into more of a quiet mind, it's just like, oh, this is what I'm doing and this is great. Or actually, this seems irrelevant, or this, And so once we start minding our business, then we're trusting that our own wisdom is coming out, and that wisdom is connected to the whole. That's the piece of faith here, because it looks shit right now. And honestly, I don't know. Light on the horizon for me could be sun's coming up or sun's going down. I don't know from a universal mind perspective if it matters, because really from a universal mind perspective, we will be okay no matter what, even in death, right? And people have suffered tremendously on this earth. Ask the Syrians, ask the people in Yemen. It's not like shit doesn't happen. It happens. So our job is to then understand that there's this sort of tremendous okayness, right, that we can lose touch with because of all the news coming in. And I sometimes do, as you know, as I've shared with you. I'm very honest about this. But also this faith that there's this intelligence, which is this word mind, is this intelligence in life that is bigger than our personal intelligence. And that intelligence is married to love, inseparable. And if we come into alignment with the feeling of love and intelligence in us, then we are going to contribute to the expansion or the direction or the huge complexity of that mind energy as it wants to express. It's like we get to express our piece of it. And just trust that that's all we can do. That's the part that I sometimes have a hard time with. Like, I want to do more. I want to do everything. But actually, how do I stay in this feeling of love and do what Alice has helped me to, has phrased it as what's for me to do. What's for me to do. And trust that that's all we can do. And then we can relax, a little bit about everyone else and what everyone else is doing. Yeah, Nancy.
I want to share very briefly an experience I had about 1.5 years ago. I had been asked to and was in the process of creating what turned out to be a 7-part community television series here in Santa Cruz with the modest title, The Future We Need and How to Get It. And every month as I was preparing for it, I would go through these emotional ups and downs that were huge because the issues I was dealing with were so difficult, as we've been talking about today. And it was like this little kid in me was showing up to kind of run things. And this one afternoon, I was just feeling completely overwhelmed, and I was lying on my bed, and my 5-year-old showed up, and I was literally kicking my feet and beating my fists on the bed and said, I can't do it, it's too hard, it's too hard. And then it felt almost literally as if something kind of reached down and touched my arm and said, it's okay, sweetie, you don't have to. This isn't your job, it's mine. It was like just this whole whoosh came through me. So as we've been talking about mind and this larger thing, it was just to my little child self, it was this very personal, intimate moment that was both one of profound love and profound power. And I just needed to show up and let it flow through me, kind of get out of my own way.
Thank you for sharing that, Nancy. And thank you, Amy and Chantal and Dave for, and Jen for having these conversations. For what I'm hearing is this attempt that we have of working with all the very real experiences that are happening to our planet and to the world, and trying to navigate from a society that has evolved from responding to its external stimuli as opposed to real, and thinking that's where the power lies, as opposed to really understanding that our true power is it lives from within us, and that's the power that will help us navigate what I'm seeing as this bridge from evolving from the species as we are as human beings to whatever our next yet to be is. And personally, I with all humility, I have no idea. I mean, I just have no idea what's next. But I know that it is the spiritual practice that I lean heavily on. Nancy, you described exactly what I feel moves through me, and that is that when I can get to that place of deep humility of my place on this planet and in this universe and with all life as it is, that there's some wisdom that comes through me and then wants to be expressed as me. And when I can remember that, when I can get in touch with that, there's something quite magical that seems to happen, and life begins to work even in my small little universe. So I think this is a wonderful place for people to begin to open up to that inner wisdom. My hope for humanity is that we get in touch with the power within and begin to respond from the inner stimuli, and then begin to express. We're no different than anything else on this planet, except that we just mess with our reality a lot more than any of the other species on the planet. And when we can become in greater alignment with the mystery and allow it to move through us, similar to how we see nature moving in a kind of flow, that's when the world, or whatever's left of it, will work. And I also want to thank you for inviting me to this, Amy. I have a commitment the next 4 weeks at this exact time, so I don't know that I'll be able to be present with you, but I will try to connect in other ways. So I just wanted to pipe up and share my gratitude with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Alice is the spiritual director at Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Cruz. And one of the things that this conversation I had yesterday really clarified some things for me about, and looking at the big picture. Alice, you've talked about, oh gosh, what's her name? The very famous Joanna Macy's work, where she talks about people are going into three sort of, people who are ready to start to help with this transformation are sort of in three categories. One would be the holy no, which is people who are saying no, enough, and we're going to be out there on the streets. And then there are like the visionaries who are looking at what can we build and create that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be healthy, that's going to be beautiful, that's going to be harmonious. And then there are the people who are grounded in this deeper wisdom of the mind and spirit. I don't know if it's deeper, that they are just sort of like the light workers is what he was calling them. And for a while I was seeing that as a dichotomy, and I was like, are you saying that the people who are activists are not equal to he was talking about camps, and so then I had this huge insight, was that we have to respect everybody's place, and yet they're also all connected, so that I can see people in our community really needing the medicine people, the healers, and being able to go to them for support. I mean, I think it's like, for me, for Extinction Rebellion, half of our work should be getting those resources together for people so that they can come from their best thinking and their best states of mind. And so I see that as now super important, and anyway, so it was just a really fascinating conversation that we had. I think my thing was like, well, because there's so much denial that's happening around this issue, that's a place people want to go to. Like, oh, it's all going to be fine. Or when people say, oh, we're going to have the creativity to sort it out. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. There's something about just sort of accepting that we don't know. And also facing facts. So my message to my friend Russell was, I need to be able to trust those healers that they are not in denial, that they've seen the information, they've integrated it, and then they're like, they don't feel like they want to run around and do all this other stuff, but they are ready to help with the inner work. And so it just feels like if we can see ourselves as complementary.
Well, Amy, if you think about just most organic structures, even the human body, the heart doesn't, pump blood and then be jealous because it can't take in oxygen and, feed all our cells with nutrients. It's, each part has to work together. And so that's how I see Joanne Macy's message just pulls it together to say that. So I'm not going to, put down the person who's marching. That's really good. But what I am going to do is I'm going to be really clear about what's mine to do so that I can be the best heart or lungs or, brain is, whatever part in the one organism of humanity that I am, I need to play my part and I need to play it well. Yes. All righty. So, Felicia, any last thoughts from you? Are you good? Felicia's.
I'm going to have to go, Amy, because it's 10 to 7 here. I've got to go and do things like make dinner and.
Yeah.
So, but so I'm just conscious that I'm recording it and everything, so I can't leave.
Oh, I see. Do you want to get up? You want to get up and go about, and then let Felicia do. I just want to see if she had anything to say. Yeah. Just real quickly.
Hi. Thank you so much for this. This has been it feels really good. I'm finding myself really wanting to hear about the 3 principles. So, I'm imagining that will come, or maybe there's some reading you could direct me to in the meantime. But yeah, I really resonate with a lot of what's been said around finding that sort of eternal consciousness and really moving from there, aligning with a higher purpose and with source and coming from that truth as opposed from mind or heart. I'm also still waking up, but yeah, this is really great. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So Chantal, see, she's suffering from the effects of global warming already over there.
True. Or maybe just, the part of nature that hits you when you're 50 plus.
All right. So my friends, thank you so much for joining on. And yeah, please. And the next one is about climate anxiety and grief and support for that. So if you have friends who are going through that, this is a place to send them to. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And Chantal, we'll get another meeting together.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.